I sat by the window, a cup of tea cooling in my hands. The steam had long since disappeared, replaced by the faint, bitter taste of the cold brew. I didn't mind, though my mind wasn't on the tea. It was on something else entirely. Outside, the October rain drummed relentlessly on the windowsill, its sound monotonous, like the ticking of an old clock that had long since stopped being useful. The same feeling echoed in my chest, irrelevant, forgotten, unused. I am Anunice Grimshaw. I'm 78 years old, and I've been a widow for 15 years now. 15 years without Alfred, without the sound of his heavy boots clattering in from the rain, without the warmth of his voice filling the house. The house in Cumberland, our home, a place that used to buzz with life, the sound of Gavin's laughter, the hum of the television, music playing softly on Sundays. All that remained now was silence, a silence that clung to every corner, every creaking floorboard, every dust-covered photograph. I gazed at the rain, the endless drizzle that blurred the world outside. It mirrored the blur I felt inside, as if everything was slowly fading into the background. All I had left were memories faded and distant. When did things start changing? When did my son become so distant? When did I stop being the mother and start being an inconvenience? I rose from my chair, my old knees protesting. A sharp ache shot up my legs, a reminder of how the years had taken their toll. Alfred's chair remained empty. I leaned on my cane, the creaking of the floorboards beneath me, a painful reminder of time's passing. As I walked toward the mantelpiece, my eyes fell on the photograph of Alfred and me on our wedding day. He looked so handsome, so full of life. He had been everything a woman could want. I ran my fingers over the dusty frame, whispering softly, "What would you say, Alfred? What would you say about Gavin now? Gavin, my son. He was 2 years old when we got married. The joy of our lives. Alfred and I had spoiled him, but we hadn't coddled him. At least I thought we hadn't. We gave him everything we could. Education, love, stability. He was a smart boy. He did well in school, polite, respectful, always dreaming of becoming an engineer like his father. Then Alfred got sick, lung cancer. It was fast, ruthless. 1 minute, he was there, and the next, he was gone. Gavin was 37 at the time, married to Laura, living his life, working at an insurance company. I thought the grief would bring us closer. After all, we were all we had left. But it didn't. It drove a wedge between us. I remember the funeral vividly. Gavin, standing at the grave, tall and thin, looking more like Alfred every day, but somehow hollow. When they lowered the coffin, I sobbed uncontrollably. And Gavin, he looked away, as if it didn't concern him. That night, when the guests had left and the house had quieted, I asked him, "Gavin, are you okay?" He had looked at me like I was a stranger. "Mom, I'm 40. I'm not a child. You can't cling to the past." I didn't understand. I still don't. A few years later, Gavin divorced Laura. I didn't fully understand why. Laura was sweet, perhaps a little too naive, but she loved him. Gavin had said they grew out of the relationship. They had a son, Keith, who was 10 at the time. They shared custody, though Keith always spent more time with Laura. But something had shifted in Gavin. Calls became less frequent. Visits were shorter. And when he did come, he was distant. The conversations, empty. He'd sit staring at his phone or talk about work bonuses, promotions, a new car. I was happy for his success. But where had the warmth gone? "Gavin, honey, we've become such strangers," I had said one evening, pouring tea for him. He looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Mom, I come, what else do you want?" I felt a knot tighten in my chest. "I want attention, real attention." He sighed. A sigh I recognized, the kind he'd used when he was a child, trying to appease me. "I got a job. Mom, I got a life. I can't sit here for hours talking about the neighbors or your TV shows." It hurt more than I let on. He didn't see it, but I did. All I had ever wanted was to be close to him, to share our lives. But now I was just a passing distraction in his busy world, and I had made a mistake. I realized a mistake I'd been making for years. I'd given too much of myself. For him, for Alfred, for the family. And in return, I had asked for too little. But isn't that what mothers do? Isn't that what I had been saving for all these years? So I could help him. Keith, my grandson, was the only one who still remembered me. He visited often, first with his mother, then on his own as he grew older. He would help in the garden, bring books, listen to my stories. He was the only one who showed genuine interest in my life. "Grandma, you need to keep up with the times." Keith had told me one day, patiently teaching me how to use a smartphone. You can't just sit in the past. And so I learned how to use a computer, how to shop online, how to connect with the world in ways I never thought possible. I even started a blog about gardening, my little sanctuary in the online world. It was a small community, mostly older women like me, but it was mine. Keith went to university in a nearby town, and I missed him terribly when he stopped visiting as often. But we kept in touch, our bond strengthening through video calls. He talked about his studies, his friends, his plans for the future. One day, it was last spring, Keith came to me with unexpected news. "Grandma," he said, "Dad's getting married." I was surprised. Gavin had dated a few women after the divorce, but none of those relationships lasted long. "To whom?" "Jenny. She works at the dental office. They've been seeing each other for a year, but kept it quiet." I had vaguely remembered Gavin mentioning a Jenny, but I didn't know much about her. "Is she a good woman?" I asked cautiously. Keith shrugged. "She's normal, a little bossy, maybe, but she acts different with Dad than with the rest of us. She's all sweet and nice. But when she turns away, she's a different person." I nodded, understanding. I had met people like that before. "Well, if your father's happy." "He says he is," Keith interrupted. "But you know, Grandma, I think he's just tired of being alone. Jenny's persistent, and she's got a daughter from her first marriage. Abby's 18th now. It's a package deal." I smiled softly at Keith's observation. People get married for all kinds of reasons. "Honey, it's not for us to judge." Keith wasn't convinced. "Yeah, but there's more. They want a big wedding, a really expensive one. Dad said he's going to ask you for help with the money." The bitterness started to creep into my chest. "How much?" Keith hesitated. "A lot. I think it's about 3 times what he's already asked for. The Hilltop Manor, 100 guests, music, the whole thing." Of course, Gavin didn't call himself. He sent his son, just like always, asking for money. But I didn't say no. I couldn't. After all, he was my son. I had already given so much, hadn't I? "Keith, you tell your father I'll help," I said, feeling the weight of the decision already pulling me down. It would be the last time I gave in. The last time I let them manipulate me. It had always been the 3 of us, Alfred. Gavin and me. That was how it was supposed to be. A small family, but a family full of love. But over time, I had begun to realize that things were changing quietly, imperceptibly, but with a relentless pace. My world, once full of noise and movement, had slowly turned into something much quieter, something I wasn't sure I recognized anymore. I remember when Gavin was a child. He had always been full of energy, his laughter filling the house like music. He would race around the house, chasing after the cat or playing with his toy cars, oblivious to the struggles of the adults around him. He had been my pride and joy. Alfred had worked long hours at the factory, and I spent my days as a nurse at the local hospital. Together, we had built a life for him, a life I thought was stable and secure. But somewhere along the way, Gavin had changed. I first noticed it when he was in his 20s. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but a subtle one. The once polite, cheerful boy had become more distant. His phone calls became fewer, his visits shorter. He moved out of the house, married Laura, and settled into a life of his own. But it wasn't just the physical distance that hurt. It was the emotional distance that followed. When Alfred got sick, I thought for sure that this would bring us all closer. After all, we had always been a tight-knit family, hadn't we? But instead of coming together, Gavin pulled away even more. He would visit, of course, but it was like he was there in body only, not in spirit. I would catch him staring blankly at the wall or on his phone, checking emails, scrolling through social media as if nothing was happening in the world that really mattered. One night, after Alfred's condition had worsened, I tried to talk to Gavin. I needed him more than ever, but when I brought it up, he just shrugged and said, "I have my own life. Mom, I can't be here all the time." That was when it hit me. Gavin had already started to move on without us, without me, and I was still stuck, hanging on to the past, trying to make sense of it all. I hadn't realized then that this was the beginning of the end of what I had once thought was a strong, supportive family. After Alfred passed, I had hoped things would improve. I thought that grieving together would bring us closer, that we would find solace in each other's company. But instead, it seemed to drive an even bigger wedge between us. Gavin, at 37, was already a grown man. He had a wife, a job, a life, And me, I was just his mother, the woman who had given up so much for him, only to be left alone when I needed him the most. It wasn't long after Alfred's death that Gavin's marriage to Laura began to unravel. I don't know the full story. Gavin never really talked about it, but I know they divorced. The reason, according to Gavin, they had just grown out of the relationship. It didn't make sense to me then, and it still doesn't. But whatever the reason, I was left to pick up the pieces. And of course, it was me who helped him out when he needed money to buy a house. It was me who put up the down payment, just as I had done for every other major milestone in his life. As Gavin's life continued, it felt as though he was becoming more and more isolated from me. The visits became rarer, the phone calls even less frequent. He would come to see me. Yes, but only when he needed money for a new car, money for repairs, money for vacations. I didn't mind. At least he still needed me for something. I told myself, but deep down, I knew it wasn't right. I had given him everything, and yet it never seemed to be enough. And then came Keith, my grandson. Keith was different. He wasn't like Gavin, distant, cold. Keith actually cared. He visited me often. At first, it was with his mother, then later on his own as he got older. He would help me with the garden, listen to my stories, bring me books. And when I struggled with new technology, Keith patiently taught me how to use a smartphone, a computer, even set up a blog for me. "Grandma, you've got to keep up with the times," he'd say with a smile. "You can't just live in the past." He was right. I couldn't. And so, with his help, I started learning new things, opening myself up to a world I had once thought was beyond me. I started writing about my garden online, sharing tips and stories about the roses I grew. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And people noticed I had a small following, mostly older women like me. But it gave me purpose. When Keith went off to university in a neighboring town, I missed him terribly. I missed the conversations we had, the times he would visit me just to talk. But even though he wasn't around as often, I knew that our bond was strong. We kept in touch through video calls, and I enjoyed hearing about his studies, his friends, his plans for the future. He was a kind, thoughtful young man. I never wanted him to feel burdened by my own loneliness, so I kept my feelings to myself. But the more Gavin pulled away, the more Keith became my anchor. And the more Gavin distanced himself, the more I realized that my son wasn't the person I thought he was. At least, not anymore. One day, Keith came to me with news I wasn't expecting. "Grandma, Dad's getting married." I didn't know how to respond. Gavin had dated a few women after his divorce, but none of them had lasted. And now, a wedding. "To who?" "Jenny," Keith replied. "She works at the dental office. They've been together for a while, but they kept it quiet." "Jenny." I had heard her name before, but I didn't know anything about her. "Is she a good woman?" Keith shrugged. "She's fine, I guess, but she's a bit bossy. She's always so sweet to Dad. But when she's not around him, she's different. Like, she has two faces." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I had been around enough to recognize that behavior. Still, I nodded. "If your dad's happy?" Keith didn't sound convinced. "He says he is, but I think he's just tired of being alone. Jenny's very persistent, and she has a daughter, Abby. They're a package deal." I smiled softly at Keith. "People get married for all sorts of reasons. Honey, it's not our place to judge." But Keith wasn't done. "They want a big wedding, a really big wedding, and they're going to ask you for money." I felt my heart sink. Of course they were. Gavin didn't call me directly. He sent his son to do his bidding. Typical. But I didn't say no. I couldn't. He was my son. He needed me. "I'll help," I said quietly. And with that, I sealed my fate. The last time I would ever give in. The wedding plans were underway before I could even grasp the magnitude of what was happening. Gavin and Jenny, with all their enthusiasm, were moving forward with everything. The venue, the guest list, the details, they were all meticulously laid out as if there was no room for hesitation, no room for second thoughts. I, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces. There I was, trying to convince myself that this was what I had always wanted for my son, his happiness, his success, his life moving forward. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of being sidelined. The phone calls became more frequent after I agreed to help. Gavin, though he spoke with a voice full of cheer and gratitude, never failed to remind me of my contribution. It was always framed as if I was doing it for him. But there was a part of me, buried deep inside, that wondered if this was his way of keeping me in line. After all, it wasn't just the wedding he was asking for help with. It was everything. The house, the car, the vacations, and now the wedding. But I told myself, he's my son. I have to help. I remember the first time I spoke to Jenny. She came over to the house, smiling brightly. But there was something behind her eyes that unsettled me. She looked around the room like she was already planning changes. The silver tea set, my mother's old clock, things I had inherited from my family. Things that meant more to me than anything else in this house. I could see her eyeing them, sizing them up as if they were just items to be disposed of. If only I wasn't so attached to them. We sat down for tea, and she started talking about the wedding plans. She was so full of energy, speaking about every detail with such excitement. The flowers, the dress, the menu. I couldn't keep up. It was all so overwhelming, and yet all I could do was nod and smile. It's going to be the best wedding ever. Ununice, she said with a bright smile, reaching across to pat my arm in a gesture that was far too familiar. I just know you'll love it. I had my doubts, but I kept them to myself. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was what Gavin needed. The phone calls grew more intense as the wedding day approached. Jenny, on the other end of the line, with her cheerful tone, kept reminding me of the details. Ununice, about your outfit, have you found something yet? She would ask, it has to fit the color scheme. You know, silver or light lavender. The message was clear. I wasn't to be left out. But I also wasn't to take up too much space. One afternoon, I went shopping for a new dress. She insisted on it. It wasn't enough for me to wear my own clothes, those that had stories and memories woven into them. No, I had to wear something new, something that fit into her perfect wedding. The whole experience left me feeling empty, like I was just another guest. Another piece of the puzzle, nothing more. I bought a silver dress, just as she had asked. But it wasn't just the dress that bothered me. It was everything. The wedding was no longer about my son and his future. It was about Jenny's dream, about her perfect vision of a life that I could never fully be a part of. I spent hours looking at the dress in the mirror, wondering if this was what it had come to, wondering if my life had been reduced to nothing more than a tool for their success, for their happiness. The days leading up to the wedding felt like a blur. My knees ached more than usual, and the loneliness grew heavier. I spent hours in the garden, trimming the roses, trying to escape my thoughts. It was the only place where I felt some semblance of peace. But even there, the feeling of being replaced by someone else lingered. One evening, Keith called me, his voice filled with concern. Grandma, how's everything going with the wedding? Are you okay? I didn't know how to answer him. How could I explain that I was sinking under the weight of it all? How could I tell him that I had become nothing more than a shadow in my own family? I'm fine. Keith, really, I lied. But even I could hear the tremor in my voice. I could hear the loneliness in the spaces between my words. Keith was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed. You know, Grandma, you don't have to go through with this. If you feel uncomfortable, you don't have to. You've already done so much for them. Maybe it's time to think about yourself. His words stung. They were true, but they stung. I wasn't used to thinking about myself. I had always thought of others first, Alfred, Gavin, even Laura, the people I had loved, the people I had tried to make happy. But it was as if all of that had come to a crashing halt. The wedding day finally arrived. I stood at the window, staring at the rain, watching it pour down as if the heavens themselves were mourning with me. My hands shook as I adjusted my dress, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Keith would be there. I knew he would keep me company, as he always did. But Gavin, I wasn't sure anymore if he would even notice I was there. The cab pulled up to Hilltop Manor, the grand mansion looming ahead. I felt a tightness in my chest as I stepped out, my knees aching with each step. This was it, the day I had been dreading, and yet it was here. I had given everything, and now all I had to show for it was a seat at the back of the hall, surrounded by strangers. As I entered the grand hall, the sound of the guests filled the air, but there was no warmth in the atmosphere. No one greeted me. No one seemed to notice the woman who had given her all for the family. And then I saw him, Gavin, standing at the altar, his face flushed with excitement. But when his eyes met mine, they didn't hold the warmth I had once known. Instead, they were distant, as if I was just another guest at a party I wasn't invited to. And in that moment, I realized the truth. I had been replaced. I wasn't part of this family anymore. Not in the way I had once hoped. I was a spectator. Nothing more. I took my seat, alone. In the corner of the room, I had been reduced to nothing more than a guest at my own son's wedding. The man I had raised, the boy I had loved, he had become a stranger to me. I could feel the sting of the tears that threatened to fall, but I held them back. After all, what good would they do now? The ceremony passed in a blur. The vows, the exchange of rings, the kiss. I watched it all, but I couldn't really see it. Not in the way a mother should. All I could feel was the coldness that had settled between Gavin and me, the distance that had stretched too far for me to reach. I looked at Jenny, standing next to him, radiant in her ivory gown, her smile wide and rehearsed. I wondered if she even knew who she had married. Was she aware that the man she called her husband had slowly, but surely, stopped being the person I had raised? The guests milled about after the ceremony, congratulating the newlyweds, but I didn't feel a part of it. I could barely find my breath beneath the weight of the silence that enveloped me. People spoke to me, of course polite small talk, mostly about the weather and how lovely the ceremony had been, but I wasn't really present for them. I had been reduced to a backdrop in this grand event, invisible to those who mattered most. I slipped away to the terrace for a few moments, trying to find some space to breathe. The sun had begun to set, casting a soft golden glow over the lawn. For a brief second, I thought about Alfred. He had loved the sunsets. The way the sky looked just before nightfall, I could almost hear his voice, warm and comforting, telling me everything would be all right. But it wasn't all right. Not anymore. I could feel my anger building slowly, quietly, deep within me. It was a slow burn, a quiet fury that simmered beneath the surface. I had spent years being the good mother, the supportive wife, the caretaker, and what did I have to show for it? A son who couldn't see me, a daughter-in-law who wanted nothing more than to push me out of the picture, and a life that seemed to be slipping through my fingers. Enough. It was time for me to take control, time for me to reclaim what was mine. I'd always been patient, always the one to hold back, to keep quiet. But now, I realized something. Patience wasn't going to change anything. Silence wasn't going to make them see me. No, if I wanted to be heard, I had to make them listen. I walked back inside, my head held high. I couldn't afford to be meek anymore. As much as it hurt, as much as it stung, I had to do this. For me, Gavin was standing at the far end of the hall, talking with some of his colleagues. I watched him from across the room, my heart heavy. He hadn't even noticed that I had returned. He was laughing, his back turned to me, engaged in yet another conversation about his new life. I wasn't even part of the conversation. I moved through the crowd, my cane tapping against the marble floor, my steps deliberate. When I reached him, I didn't hesitate. I placed my hand on his shoulder, and when he turned to face me, I saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes. He wasn't expecting me. Not here. Not now. Gavin, I said, my voice steady but filled with a quiet resolve. We need to talk. His smile faltered for a brief second, but he quickly recovered, his hand rubbing the back of his neck. Mom, not now. We're in the middle of the reception. I wasn't going to be dismissed again. No. Now, I could see the tension in his face, the unease. He wasn't prepared for this, and I wasn't about to let him off the hook this time. Mom, I don't have time for this, Gavin said, his voice tinged with frustration. The wedding, it's not the right time. I've had enough of your excuses. Gavin, I said, my voice rising slightly. Enough of this pretending that everything's fine, that I don't matter. I've spent my life supporting you, making sacrifices. And what do I get in return? A seat in the back of the hall, a mother pushed aside for a new family. And don't you dare try to tell me I'm overreacting. You know exactly what I'm talking about. His face twisted in discomfort. He didn't know how to respond. And for the first time in a long time, I saw something in his eyes, guilt. It was fleeting, but it was there. Mom, please, he said, looking away. Not here. Not now. But I wasn't finished. You wanted me to pay for this wedding. Right. To pay for your perfect day. You wanted my money, my help. But when it came time to show up for me, to be there for your own mother, nothing, not even a second glance. He stepped back, his hand pressing against his forehead. I didn't mean for this to happen. It's just complicated. Complicated. No, Gavin, it's not complicated. What's complicated is that I've spent my whole life giving everything I have, and you've taken it all. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being treated like I'm invisible. This wedding, it's not just a celebration for you. It's a reminder to me that I've been replaced. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room seemed to quiet around us. I wasn't sure if he heard me. I wasn't sure if he understood, but I had said it. Finally. And it felt freeing. I didn't want to hurt you, Gavin muttered, his voice barely audible, but I could see the walls he had built around himself start to crack. Just a little. I didn't wait for him to say anything more. I turned and walked away. my heart racing. The truth was, I didn't need Gavin's apology. I didn't need his excuses. I needed him to understand, to realize what he had done to me. But maybe that would never happen. Maybe it was too late. I went outside again, needing the air, needing space. The evening sky was dark now, the stars barely visible through the clouds. I stood on the terrace, staring out at the dimly lit garden, my thoughts swirling. I had taken the first step. Now I needed to be strong enough to follow through, for my own sake. I wasn't going to let this wedding be the end of me. The night dragged on, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything around me had turned into a carefully orchestrated performance. The guests were all smiles, chatting and clinking glasses, pretending to enjoy themselves. While I stood on the sidelines, my heart heavy with a mix of anger and sorrow, I had said my piece to Gavin. I had made it clear that I was no longer going to quietly fade into the background of his life. But I knew that one confrontation wasn't enough. He had been treating me like an afterthought for so long that it would take more than words to change that. It was time for action. I found myself moving through the crowd again, this time more determined. I had spent so many years giving everything I had to my family, and what had I gotten in return? A son who could barely look me in the eye, a daughter-in-law who clearly didn't want me there. I felt like a stranger in my own life, but I wasn't going to be that woman anymore. I wasn't going to be the quiet, patient mother who gave and never asked for anything in return. It was time to take control of my own destiny. I stepped into the kitchen, trying to escape the noise of the reception. It was quieter here, though the staff was still moving about, preparing for the next round of guests. One of the servers looked up when I entered, offering a polite smile. "Can I help you?" "Mrs. Grimshaw?" she asked. "No, thank you," I replied, my voice steady but cold. "I just need a moment." I leaned against the counter, trying to calm my racing thoughts. What was I supposed to do now? How was I supposed to handle this? I couldn't just walk away and pretend everything was fine. I had already made it clear to Gavin that I wasn't happy, that I wasn't going to stand idly by anymore. But what about Jenny? She had been just as complicit in this distance between Gavin and me. She had come into our family and claimed her place, pushing me further out with every step. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it all settle in my chest. For the first time in years, I realized something: I didn't need them to validate me. I didn't need Gavin's approval, and I didn't need Jenny's approval. I had spent my life chasing their happiness, their approval, and in the end, it had only left me empty. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for people who didn't even see me. "Excuse me, Mrs. Grimshaw, but I believe your son is looking for you," the server said gently, breaking my thoughts. I straightened up, nodding. I knew this moment would come. Gavin would want to smooth things over, to make it seem like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine, and I wasn't going to pretend that it was. I walked out of the kitchen and made my way back to the main hall, my steps slow but steady. I could hear Gavin's voice before I saw him. He was talking to some of his friends, laughing, clearly enjoying himself. When he saw me, his smile faltered for just a second, but then he regained his composure. "Mom," he said, his voice strained, "I've been looking for you. We need to talk." "Do we?" I asked, keeping my tone even. I wasn't going to let him control the conversation this time. "Yes." "Please, can we go somewhere private?" he urged, motioning toward the garden. I followed him outside, my mind racing. What was he going to say? What was his excuse going to be this time? Once we were outside, away from the noise and the chaos of the reception, Gavin turned to face me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and frustration. "Mom, I know things have been hard," he began, his voice softer now. "But you've got to understand, this wedding, this whole thing, it's not just about Jenny and me. It's about everything. It's about moving forward. And I need you to understand that. I need you to be a part of it." I raised an eyebrow. "A part of it? You've already made it clear where I stand in all of this. Gavin, you've made it clear that I'm an afterthought." "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "That's not it at all. It's just, I've got a lot on my plate. Okay, and Jenny, she's been helping me with everything. She's just really excited. And sometimes she can get carried away, but she doesn't mean any harm. Does she even care about me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Does she care that I am your mother? Or am I just some inconvenience to her?" Gavin opened his mouth to respond, but he hesitated, unsure of what to say. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the part of him that knew I was right, and the part of him that still wanted to please Jenny, still wanted to make everything look perfect. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said after a long pause. "I really am, but you've got to understand. I'm trying to make this work. For us, for our family, Jenny and I, We've got a future, and I need you to be a part of it. I need your support. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Support. After everything that had happened, after the way I had been pushed aside, dismissed like I didn't matter. I've been supporting you your whole life. Gavin, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. I've given you everything. And now, when I need you, where are you? Where's my son? Gavin's face twisted in discomfort. I don't know what to say. I want you to be happy for me. I shook my head, feeling tears well up in my eyes. But I refused to let them fall. I wasn't going to cry for him. Not anymore. Happy for you. I asked, my voice bitter. You've turned my life into something I don't recognize. And you think I should be happy? No, Gavin. I'm not happy, and I'm not going to pretend that I am. There was a long pause, and for the first time, I saw the weight of guilt on his face, but it was too little. Too late. I'm not going to be your punching bag anymore. Gavin, I said, my voice steady. I'm not going to be the one you come to when you need something. I'm done. It's time for me to think about myself for once. Gavin didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking at me, his face unreadable. And in that moment, I knew that things would never be the same between us. I had taken my first step. Now, there was no turning back. It was clear now, Gavin wasn't going to change overnight. If anything, the confrontation only served to widen the gap between us. And Jenny, well, she wasn't going to make things any easier. In fact, I began to feel like a constant reminder to her that she wasn't the only one in Gavin's life. I had been here long before her, and I would be here long after. But what good did it do to remind her of that? The damage had already been done. I returned to the house after the reception, feeling like a ghost walking through my own door. Everything felt strange, quiet, empty. The house that had once been full of laughter now echoed with silence, as if it too had been abandoned. The days after the wedding were a blur of half-hearted phone calls from Gavin. He was trying too hard. I thought to smooth things over, but it was always the same. Mom, I didn't mean to hurt you. You know I love you. But those words felt hollow. They didn't reach me anymore. He didn't even know what love was anymore, not the kind I had given him all these years. The phone rang one evening, and when I saw Gavin's name on the screen, I almost didn't answer. But I did, maybe, deep down. I was still hoping for something, anything that would prove he still cared. Mom, he said, his voice sounding a little more strained than usual. We need to talk. There's something important about the wedding, about the bills. I frowned. The bills, of course. It was always about the money, wasn't it? What now? Gavin, look, I know you've been upset, and I understand why. I'm sorry for how things have gone, he said, quickly, as though trying to get the words out before I could interrupt. But we have a problem with the final payment for the venue. They won't release the deposit unless it's paid. I could almost hear Jenny in the background, pressing him for answers. Gavin, I said, cutting him off. I told you I wasn't paying the remaining balance. I already gave you what I could. Mom, please, you don't understand. This is bigger than just a wedding. If we don't settle it, Hilltop Manor is going to sue. It could ruin my reputation. Jenny's, everything we've worked for. I didn't answer right away. His words stung. Not because I didn't understand what he was saying, but because I did. This wasn't about him or Jenny or the wedding. It was about me, about him using me as a tool, a source of money, whenever he needed it. Do you hear yourself? Gavin, I asked, my voice steady but firm. Is that all you think I'm good for? Money. I don't know what you want me to say. Mom, he replied, but I need your help. Please, for once, just help me. I've helped you enough, I said coldly, and you've never once thought about how I feel. You just use me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could feel the weight of the silence, and I knew he was struggling with the words, but it was too late. The realization hit me harder than I expected. Gavin didn't need my help. He needed me to do what he wanted, to fix his problems when they became too big for him to handle. And when I couldn't, I became the problem. I had nothing left to give, nothing except the pain of knowing that I had lost him. Not to time, not to distance, but to the expectations he had built around me. I'm sorry. Mom, Gavin's voice came through, quieter now, almost resigned. But I have no one else to turn to. I've always been here, I said softly. But I'm not doing this anymore. The line went dead, and I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I had said my piece, for the first time in years. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from getting what you want. It was the kind that comes from knowing that you've done what's right for yourself. But it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Gavin's call had opened something in me, something that couldn't be closed. The cracks in our relationship had widened, and now they couldn't be ignored. The truth was out there, clear and unambiguous. He had chosen Jenny, his new life, his new family. I had been nothing more than an afterthought. But I wasn't going to let that define me anymore. A few days passed, and Gavin didn't call. It was strange. A part of me wanted to reach out, to fix things, to make it right. But then I remembered. This wasn't about fixing things for him. This was about me. I had my own life to live, my own future to embrace. I wasn't going to spend my days mired in guilt or regret. Not anymore. One evening, I received a call from Keith. He had been quiet for a while, and I missed him terribly. "Grandma, how are you?" he asked, his voice warm and genuine. "I haven't heard from you in a while." I smiled at the sound of his voice. "I'm fine, Keith. Just taking things one day at a time." "That's good," he said. A brief pause before he continued. "I wanted to ask, are you coming over this weekend?" "I would love to," I said, feeling a rush of warmth. "I'm looking forward to seeing you. I've got some news for you." "Grandma," he added, "something I think you'll like." "Tell me," I urged, eager for a distraction from everything that had happened. "I'm planning a visit to the coast next month," Keith said, his voice excited. "You always said you wanted to take a trip, so I thought maybe we could go together. It'll be a small getaway, just the two of us. What do you say?" My heart fluttered. I hadn't taken a trip in years, not since Alfred passed. The idea of getting away, of spending time with Keith, of doing something just for me, it felt like a lifeline. "I'd love that, Keith," I said, feeling something stir within me, a spark of hope, of excitement. "Let's do it. Let's make it happen." And for the first time in a long while, I realized that there was still so much for me to experience, so much life left to live. The next morning, I took a long walk in the garden, the sun shining through the trees. It was the first time in days that I had felt truly at peace, and I allowed myself to savor it. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for Gavin's approval, or Jenny's, or anyone else's. I was living for me. As I reached the rose bushes, I thought of Alfred, of the many years we had spent together, and I thought of Gavin, and how things would never be the same. But I also thought of Keith, and the future that still lay ahead. I was ready for whatever came next. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of my life started to settle into a new normal. I had taken small steps, big steps for me, really in reclaiming my own life. I wasn't spending my days waiting for phone calls from Gavin or feeling the sting of Jenny's cold indifference. I was focused on myself for once. Keith and I had made plans to take that trip to the coast, and I was looking forward to it more than I could express. I had never allowed myself to indulge in something like this before, especially not without the constant guilt of feeling like I was neglecting someone else. But not this time. This time, it was all about me. But then, as the days grew warmer, something unexpected happened. It wasn't the phone call from Gavin or the continuous pressure from Jenny. It was something much more shocking, something that seemed to change everything in an instant. I was at home one afternoon, sitting in the living room with a book in my hands, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I got up anyway. Curious, when I opened the door, I was surprised to find a woman standing on the other side, tall, blonde, and dressed sharply in a business suit. "Mrs. Grimshaw?" she asked, her voice polite but firm. "Yes," I said, narrowing my eyes, trying to place her. "My name is Elizabeth Norris. I represent the administration of Hilltop Manor," she said, holding out a business card. I took it. My curiosity piqued. "What is this about?" "I'm here about the remaining balance on the wedding reception bill," she said. "There's been a situation regarding payment, and your son has requested that you cover the remaining amount." I felt a rush of anger flood through me, but I kept it in check. "Not now, not with her standing here. So matter of fact, I told Gavin I wouldn't pay," I said, my voice even. She nodded, though her expression remained impassive. "I understand, Mrs. Grimshaw. But your son is in a difficult situation. Hilltop Manor is prepared to take legal action if the bill is not settled by the end of the week. I've been sent to discuss the matter." I felt my blood run cold. This was exactly what I had been dreading: the pressure, the manipulation. I had been right all along. They only cared about the money, about keeping up appearances. Nothing else mattered. I told Gavin, I began slowly, that I wasn't paying any more. "I've already given him everything I could." "Mrs. Grimshaw," Elizabeth interrupted softly, "I understand that you've been placed in a difficult position, but if the final payment isn't made, the situation could turn into a public matter. It could affect your son's reputation." I took a deep breath, trying to contain the rising frustration. "You think I don't know what's at stake?" You think I don't understand the consequences? Elizabeth looked down at her notes, then back at me. I'm just doing my job, Mrs. Grimshaw. My duty is to ensure that this situation is resolved. I stepped back, leaning against the doorframe. You want me to bail them out again? You want me to fix their mess? Like I've done so many times before. The silence between us felt heavy, like a thick fog. Elizabeth's eyes softened for just a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. I can't change the past, Mrs. Grimshaw, but I'm here to help you avoid further complications. All I need from you is the payment. It'll be handled discreetly. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside me. I had been so focused on protecting Gavin, on trying to make everything right for him. But in doing so, I had lost sight of myself. I had allowed him to use me, to manipulate me into thinking that my role in his life was just to support him, to give, and never ask for anything in return. It was enough. I looked up at Elizabeth and gave her a thin smile. Tell Gavin I'm not paying. If he wants to fix it, he can do it himself. Elizabeth seemed to hesitate, then nodded. Understood. I'll convey your decision to him, but please, think carefully. It's not just about money, it's about family. Family. The word hung in the air like a bitter aftertaste. I had given so much to this family, so much of myself. And for what? To be treated like an afterthought. To be pushed aside so easily by the very people I had sacrificed everything for. Family, I said slowly, repeating the word, if that's what it is. Then let them take care of it. With that, I closed the door, not waiting for Elizabeth to say anything more. I was done. The next few days passed in a blur of uneasy silence. Gavin didn't call again, and for the first time in ages, I wasn't constantly waiting for his next move, his next request. It was freeing in a way I hadn't expected, but there was still a nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a sense that things weren't over, that the consequences of my decision were still to come. I wasn't sure what Gavin would do, but I knew that the silence between us would eventually break. It always did. Then, just as I had started to settle into my new routine, I received a call from Keith. He sounded different this time, nervous, maybe a little anxious. Grandma, he said, his voice tight. I just wanted to check in. Is everything okay with you? I heard some things. Keith, what's going on? I asked, my heart skipping a beat. I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. He's upset. Keith admitted, his voice low. He's really mad at you. He said you're not helping, and now everything's falling apart. The wedding, the bills. He's been yelling a lot. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. Keith, I've had enough. I can't keep doing this for him. He has to start taking responsibility for his own life. I've given him everything I could, but it's never enough. I understand, Keith said, his voice full of empathy. But, Grandma, I just don't want you to be alone in this. I know Dad's hurt, but he's not thinking clearly. You're not the one who should be shouldering this. You've done enough. The tears I had been holding back all this time finally spilled over. I wasn't sure why he had been so afraid to let go. Maybe I thought it would destroy everything. Maybe I thought I would be nothing without them. But as I listened to Keith's voice, steady and calm, I realized that I wasn't alone. Not really. I'm so proud of you. Keith, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know what I would do without you, he sighed, a sound full of relief. You'll never be alone. Grandma, I promise. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a place in this world, not because of what I could give, not because of what I had done for others, but because I mattered, just as I was. The days that followed Keith's call were full of quiet reflection. I spent a lot of time in my garden, trimming the roses and letting my mind wander. It was hard not to think about the wedding, about Gavin, about the distance that had grown between us. There were moments when I wondered if I had made a mistake. Was it wrong to refuse to help him? Should I have given in, as I always had before? But every time that thought crept in, I pushed it away. I wasn't going to fall back into that cycle. I had to stay firm. The phone rang one evening, and I immediately knew who it was. Gavin. It had been days since we last spoke, and I'd half expected him to reach out. But even then, I wasn't ready for the conversation I was about to have. Mom, Gavin's voice came through the phone, low and tense. We need to talk. Can you meet me tomorrow? I felt a tightening in my chest. I had been bracing for this moment, but now that it was here, I wasn't sure what to expect. What do you want to talk about? Gavin. He hesitated for a moment before answering. About everything. About the wedding. About what's going on between us. I need to fix this. I closed my eyes. I could hear the strain in his voice, the weight of the guilt, but I had heard all of this before. The apologies, the promises to change, but it never lasted. I'll meet you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But don't expect me to just forgive you. I know, Mom, he replied quietly. But I need to try. Please, it's important. We agreed to meet at a small cafe the next afternoon. When I arrived, I was the first one there. The cafe was cozy, with soft jazz music playing in the background. The scent of coffee filled the air, but it did little to soothe the nerves that had begun to creep up inside me. Gavin arrived shortly after, looking more worn than usual. His suit was slightly disheveled, and there was a tiredness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. When he sat down across from me, he didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his gaze heavy with something I couldn't quite place. I'm sorry, he said at last, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything, for how I treated you, for what I put you through. I felt my heart tighten at his words. It was hard to tell if he truly meant them or if this was just another round of the same old routine, but there was something in his voice. This time, something raw and vulnerable that made me hesitate. I've been so wrapped up in my own life, my own problems. He continued, I pushed you away, and I didn't even realize how much it was hurting you. I took you for granted, Mom, and I hate myself for it. I sat there, staring at him, unsure of how to respond. He had never spoken to me like this before. There was a level of honesty, of openness, that I hadn't seen in years. But was it enough? Could I forgive him for all the times he had hurt me? All the times he had used me without a second thought? You say you're sorry. Gavin, I began, my voice calm but firm. But that's not enough. Not anymore. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. What can I do? Mom, what can I do to make things right? I leaned back in my chair, trying to gather my thoughts. For the first time in a long time, I realized something. I didn't need him to fix things. I didn't need his apologies or his promises. What I needed was to stand up for myself, to stop letting him control my life with his guilt trips and demands. Gavin, I said, my voice steady, I've been your mother for a long time, and I've given you everything I had my time, my love, my support. But you can't keep asking me to give more, to keep sacrificing my own well-being for yours. He looked at me, his face etched with confusion. But I need you. Mom, I've always needed you. No, I said, shaking my head. You've needed what I could give you. My support, my money, my help. But you never needed me, not the way I needed you. The words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, the silence was deafening. I could see the realization dawning on his face. I could see the guilt, the regret, the pain. I love you, Gavin, I said softly, my voice breaking slightly. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being the person you turn to when it's convenient for you. He reached across the table, his hand trembling as he tried to take mine. But I pulled away before he could touch me. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. I don't need you to fix this. Gavin, I continued, I need you to understand that I've spent my whole life trying to make things work for you, for your father, for everyone around me. But I've forgotten about myself in the process, and that's not something I can keep doing. Gavin's face crumpled, and I saw the first genuine emotion I had seen from him in a long time. I'm so sorry. Mom, he whispered. I never realized. I never saw how much I was taking from you. I know you didn't, I said, my voice softening. But I've learned something, Gavin. I've learned that I can't keep giving everything and getting nothing in return. I deserve more than that. For the first time in a long time, I saw my son truly see me, not as a source of money or support, but as a person with her own needs, her own feelings. I can't promise that I'll forgive you right away, I said, my heart heavy, but I can promise that I'm going to take care of myself from now on. And I hope you can respect that. He nodded, his eyes filled with tears. I will. Mom, I will. We sat in silence for a while, neither of us speaking. But in that silence, something shifted. The distance between us wasn't gone, but it had lessened. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. I need to go, I said finally, standing up. I've got a trip to the coast to prepare for. Gavin stood up as well, looking at me with something close to admiration. I'm glad you're going, Mom. You deserve it. More than anyone. I know, I said with a soft smile. I do. I walked out of the cafe, feeling lighter than I had in months. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path, my own path. The days after my meeting with Gavin were strangely quiet. I didn't hear from him again for a while. And at first, I wondered if he had taken my words to heart, or if he had simply gone back to his old ways. I'd expected him to reach out, to try and fix things immediately, but he didn't. Instead, I spent my time preparing for the trip with Keith. The excitement of it all being able to escape for a while, to see new places, to focus on myself was something I hadn't allowed myself in years. The thought of it filled me with a quiet joy. I made all the necessary arrangements, bought a few new clothes for the trip, and even made an effort to fix up my apartment. I hadn't realized how much I had let things slide over the years, always putting others' needs before my own. The small changes I made cleaning out old cupboards, organizing my books felt like a metaphor for the changes I was making in my own life. The day of the trip finally arrived, and I could feel the excitement building inside me. Keith had been wonderful about the whole thing, eager to show me around and make it a memorable experience. The day before, he had sent me a message saying that everything was ready, and he was excited to see me. I wasn't going to allow anything to hold me back this time, not the past, not Gavin, and certainly not Jenny. I was going to enjoy myself. For the first time in ages, I was living for me. I packed my things and waited for Keith to pick me up. As I stood by the door, ready to leave, I felt a strange sensation in my chest, a mix of excitement and fear. What would happen when I returned? Would things be different with Gavin? Could we rebuild anything from the ashes of what had been? I pushed the thoughts aside. That was future me's problem. Right now, I was going to focus on the present. Keith was waiting outside, and we had a long journey ahead of us. The world was vast, and I had only just begun to see it. The drive to the coast was peaceful. We talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily. Keith was always a good listener, and I appreciated the ease with which we could talk. I found myself smiling more than I had in a long time, the weight of the past slowly lifting from my shoulders. When we arrived at the coast, I was struck by the beauty of the place. The ocean stretched out before us, endless and inviting, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore soothing my restless mind. We spent the day walking along the beach, exploring the small town, and finding little cafes and shops that I had never seen before. It felt like the world had opened up in front of me, a world I had long forgotten to explore. That evening, as we sat by the water, watching the sunset, Keith turned to me, his face serious for the first time all day. "Grandma," he began, his voice soft, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for me, for always being there, for supporting me. I know things haven't been easy, and I know you've been through a lot, but I need you to know that I'm here for you. No matter what happens with Dad or anyone else, I'm not going anywhere." I looked at him, my heart swelling with love and pride. "I know, Keith, and I'm proud of you. You're everything I could have hoped for in a grandson." He smiled at me, and I could see the sincerity in his eyes. In that moment, I realized that maybe I didn't need Gavin's approval after all. I didn't need his validation to know that I had done a good job as a mother. Keith, standing here with me, was enough. He was proof that I had done something right, that I had created something good, something real. As the days passed, I found myself letting go of the past, of the hurt, of the resentment. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, I felt lighter, more free. The trip with Keith was everything I had needed. It gave me the space to think, to breathe, and to realize that I was not defined by the mistakes of the past. But even as I embraced this new freedom, there was still a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. It wasn't the unfinished business with Gavin that lingered. It was something else, something deeper, a feeling that perhaps this journey, this new chapter in my life, was just the beginning of something even bigger. One afternoon, as we sat in a small cafe overlooking the ocean, I received a message on my phone. I hadn't expected it to be from Gavin, but when I saw his name, I felt a flutter of unease. I took a deep breath before opening the message. It was simple. It was short. "Mom, I know we've had our differences, and I know I've made a lot of mistakes, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how I treated you, for taking you for granted. I know it's not enough, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. You're my mother, and I love you." I stared at the message, feeling a rush of emotions. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the grand gesture I had hoped for, but it was something. It was a step, and it was more than I had ever received from Gavin before. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. I didn't reply right away. I needed time to process it. I needed time to figure out what I wanted to say. But one thing was clear. Something had shifted. Maybe this wasn't the end of our story. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for healing. Keith noticed the change in my expression. "Is everything okay?" "Grandma," I nodded, a smile tugging at my lips. "Yes, Keith, everything is going to be okay." We spent the next few days enjoying the coast, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. I didn't know what the future held, but I was no longer afraid of it. I was ready to face whatever came next with an open heart. As I stood on the beach one evening, watching the waves crash against the shore, I thought about all that had happened, the pain, the loss, the healing. Life was unpredictable, and sometimes it felt like it was slipping through my fingers. But in that moment, with the wind in my hair and the sun setting behind me, I knew that no matter what, I had the strength to keep moving forward. And maybe, just maybe, things could still be fixed. The days we spent by the ocean felt like a brief respite, a pause in the chaos that had defined so much of my life. But as much as I wanted to stay lost in the beauty of the coast, I knew that eventually I would have to return to the reality that awaited me. The world I had left behind, the one filled with tension, regret, and unfinished business, was still there, just waiting for me to face it. We returned home a week later, and I was surprised to find that I felt a strange sense of peace. The sun, the fresh air, and the quiet moments with Keith had given me a sense of clarity I hadn't had in years. And while I was not ready to forgive Gavin just yet, I felt a shift in myself. I wasn't holding on to the past as tightly anymore. The guilt, the resentment, it was slowly loosening its grip. But that peace didn't last long. Within a few days of being back, Gavin called again. This time, his voice sounded different. There was no pleading, no begging for forgiveness. Instead, there was an edge to his words, something I hadn't heard before. "Mom, I need to talk to you about the wedding," he said, his voice tight. "There's been a problem with the venue. They're threatening to take us to court over the remaining balance. They want us to settle the bill immediately." I felt a tightening in my chest. This wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't just about the wedding or the bills. This was about everything that had led up to this moment. The way Gavin had manipulated me, the way Jenny had pushed me aside, and the way I had allowed it all to happen. "What are you asking of me?" "Gavin," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I need you to help with the payment," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know things haven't been good between us, but this is the only way we can fix it. If we don't pay, it could destroy everything, our lives, our future, everything we've worked for." His words were sharp, but I could tell he was struggling to keep it together. It was clear that this wasn't about the money anymore. This was about the life he had built with Jenny, the future he was trying to protect, and he was asking me to sacrifice once again for the sake of his mistakes. "I've already told you." "Gavin," I said quietly, my hand shaking as I gripped the phone. "I won't pay. I've given you everything I had, and it's still not enough." "I understand," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "but this is different. Mom, this is everything. I don't know what else to do." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "You're right, Gavin, this is everything. But it's not just about money. It's about respect. It's about seeing me for who I am, not just for what I can give you." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought he might hang up, but he didn't. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said finally, his voice low. "I really am. But I need your help. Please." I closed my eyes, feeling a deep sorrow for the son I once knew. He had become someone I didn't recognize, someone I couldn't reach, no matter how much I tried. "I'm sorry, Gavin," I said, my voice steady, "but I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to be the one who fixes everything for you." I hung up before he could respond, the weight of the decision settling over me. I had made my choice. I had stood firm, even when it hurt. I wasn't going to be manipulated anymore. Not by Gavin, not by Jenny, and not by anyone else. The days that followed were filled with a strange sense of quiet. I didn't hear from Gavin again, and I found myself growing more and more at peace with the decision I had made. I had done all I could. The rest was up to him, but the consequences of my actions were far from over. One evening, just as I was settling down for the night, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, I found Keith standing there, his face pale and strained. "Grandma," he said, his voice low. "You need to hear this." I stepped aside to let him in, feeling a sense of unease settle in my chest. "What happened?" I asked, my heart racing. "I spoke to Dad," Keith said, his voice shaky. "He's not handling it well. He's furious. He said you're trying to ruin his life, that you're refusing to help, and now he's blaming you for everything." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words hitting me like a physical blow. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but hearing it from Keith made it all the more real. Gavin was angry, and he was taking it out on me. "I didn't do this to hurt him," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I just wanted him to understand. I wanted him to see me for who I am, not just as someone who can fix his problems." "I know, Grandma," Keith said softly, "but Dad's been under so much pressure. Jenny's pushing him, and now he's blaming you for everything that's gone wrong." I shook my head. "It's not my fault." Keith, I've given him everything. And when does it stop? When do I get to live my life? Keith didn't answer immediately. He just sat down beside me, his face full of concern. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the pain of being caught between his parents' conflict. But he wasn't the one I was worried about. It was Gavin, and the consequences of my decision to stand up for myself. I'm sorry. Grandma, Keith said quietly, I really am. I know this isn't easy for you, but you've done the right thing. You deserve to be happy. I smiled at him, my heart full of love for my grandson. Thank you. Keith, I don't know what I'd do without you. As I sat there with Keith, the weight of the situation still heavy in my chest, I realized that I couldn't keep running from the consequences of my actions. I had made a choice, and now I had to live with it. Gavin was angry, and I didn't know how this was going to play out. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to be the person I had always been, the person who gave without question, who sacrificed for others without asking for anything in return. I had to live for myself now, and as painful as it was to admit, maybe that was the only way forward. The next few days passed in a haze of tension and uncertainty. Gavin's anger continued to hang over me like a storm cloud. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't as afraid of his wrath anymore. I had lived through too much, given too much, and sacrificed too much to allow anyone to make me feel small. Not Gavin, not Jenny, not anyone. The silence from Gavin was almost deafening. He didn't call again after our conversation. And while I expected him to reach out eventually, I found myself growing indifferent to the weight. In the past, I would have been consumed with guilt, wondering what I could have done differently, how I could have made things better. But not this time. This time, I felt empowered, even if it was painful. I had finally taken control of my own life. Keith, on the other hand, was a different story. Every time I saw him, he was trying to bridge the gap between his parents, desperately trying to fix the mess that had been created. But I could see the toll it was taking on him, the weight of trying to keep peace in a family that had fallen apart. I knew he was hurt, caught in the middle of the conflict. But I also knew that he understood why I had made my decision. Keith wasn't naive. He knew that sometimes the best way to help someone was to let them figure things out for themselves. One evening, after a long day of work, I received a call from Keith. His voice was unusually quiet, and I could sense the hesitation in his tone. Grandma, he began softly. I spoke to Dad again. He's really upset. He says he doesn't know how to fix things with you. He wants to, but he doesn't know where to start. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I had known this was coming, but hearing it from Keith made it all feel so real. Keith, I'm not sure there's anything to fix, I said gently. At least, not in the way your dad wants. I've done my part. I've been there for him, for all of you, for so long. But I can't keep going like this. I can't keep sacrificing my peace for his mistakes. Keith was silent for a moment. I could feel his inner conflict, the desire to mend the broken pieces of his family, but also the understanding that I had every right to stand my ground. I get it, Grandma, he finally said. I do. It's hard. You know, I just want everything to be okay. I know, Keith, I replied, my heart aching for him. I know, but sometimes the only way to make things okay is to let go. And that's what I'm doing. For me and for you, you shouldn't have to choose between us. And you don't have to just be there for me like you always have. Always. Grandma, he said, his voice steady. I'll always be there for you. I smiled softly, feeling a warmth in my chest. Keith was my rock. He was the one thing I had gotten right. The one person who had never asked for more than what I could give. And that was enough. He was enough. The following days were filled with small victories. I began to focus more on the things that brought me joy. My garden, my blog, and the simple pleasure of being on my own schedule. I'd started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. It wasn't much, just small notes and thoughts about my life, about the roses I was growing. But it was something. It was mine. Then, one morning, something unexpected happened. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping my tea and checking the news online. When my phone rang, it was Gavin. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue with my peaceful day without reopening old wounds. But something inside me urged me to answer. Maybe it was time. Maybe we could finally talk, really talk. I picked up the phone and answered softly. Gavin. There was a pause on the other end before he spoke. His voice was quieter than I remembered, more subdued. Mom, he began, I've been thinking about everything you said, about what I've done, and I wanted to apologize. Again, I know I've messed up, and I've hurt you, and I know I can't undo that. but I want you to know I'm trying. I really am. I closed my eyes, taking in his words. For the first time, they felt real. They felt genuine. There was no anger, no blame, no desperation, just an honest apology. I know you're trying, Gavin, I said softly, feeling the weight of the years lift off my shoulders. And I appreciate it. But I've been doing this for so long, forgiving, hoping, trying to make things right. And I've realized that I can't do it anymore. I can't keep putting myself last. I deserve more than that. I understand, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I just want things to be okay between us again. I don't want to lose you. Mom, the sincerity in his voice hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I thought about the years we had spent together, everything we had been through as a family. And while I wasn't ready to forgive him fully, I knew that this was a real step forward. I don't know if we'll ever be the way we were. Gavin, I said, my voice steady, but I'm willing to try, for both of us. There was a long silence, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly listening to each other. I'll be here when you're ready, Mom, he said softly. I just want to make things right, and for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but it was a start. And that was all I needed. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a beginning. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control over my life. I had stood up for myself, made my voice heard, and had begun to heal. Keith was right. It wasn't about fixing everything, but about finding a way forward, no matter how small those steps might be. And in that moment, I realized that I had finally found my way. I wasn't just living for everyone else anymore. I was living for me. The days that followed Gavin's call brought a surprising sense of calm. I could feel the shift within myself, as though I was finally beginning to see things from a different perspective. I wasn't angry anymore, at least not in the way I used to be. The bitterness that had clung to me for so long was slowly starting to dissipate, replaced by a quiet understanding of who I was and what I deserved. It wasn't about revenge or making them suffer anymore. It was about moving forward with my own life. Of course, the road ahead wasn't without its bumps. Gavin reached out several times in the following weeks, each time sounding more remorseful and earnest. And while I wasn't ready to let go of everything that had happened, I could see that he was making an effort. He was trying to change, and I couldn't ignore that. It was small steps, but it was progress. Keith, too, had been a constant source of support. We spent more time together than ever before, walking in the park, discussing life, and just enjoying each other's company. He told me about his friends, his studies, and his dreams, and I found myself feeling a sense of pride in him. I had done something right. He was the proof of that. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, enjoying the quiet of the evening, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Gavin. Mom, it read, I know I've hurt you, and I know I can't fix the past, but I want to try. I'm coming over tomorrow to talk, if that's okay. My first instinct was to hesitate. After everything, after the years of frustration and pain, was I really ready for this? Was I ready to open up that part of myself again? But then I thought of Keith, of everything I'd learned about myself over the past few months. I had been afraid of change, afraid of letting go of the past. But now, I was starting to understand that letting go wasn't about forgetting. It was about freeing myself from the weight of resentment. So, I replied simply, okay, we'll talk tomorrow. The next day, Gavin arrived at my apartment in the afternoon. He looked different, still the same in some ways, but there was a softness to him now that hadn't been there before. It was like he was seeing the world through a different lens. And maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to see me through that same lens as well. Hi, Mom, he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Can we sit down? I nodded, gesturing for him to take a seat. There was a moment of silence before either of us spoke. It was strange, after all this time, to be in the same room again, to feel the weight of the years between us. But it was also strangely comforting. It wasn't easy, but it was real. I've been thinking about everything you said. Gavin began, his voice low, about how I treated you, about the things I took for granted. I didn't realize how much I was pushing you away, how much I was hurting you. And I'm sorry. I can't change the past, but I can try to do better moving forward. I looked at him for a long time, taking in the sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. It was the first real apology I had received from him in years, and it was a step forward. I've spent so many years being angry. Gavin, I said softly, angry at you, at myself, at everything. But I've come to realize that holding on to that anger doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help you, and it doesn't help me. He nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. I know, Mom, and I'm sorry. I was selfish, and I wasn't there when you needed me. Everything got out of hand, and I didn't know how to fix it. But I want to try. I want to rebuild what we've lost. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I swallowed it down. It wasn't easy to hear him speak like this, to see the pain in his eyes, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't in years, hope. I don't know if we can ever go back to how things were, I said quietly, but I'm willing to try. Gavin, I'm willing to try and build something new. We've both made mistakes, and we've both hurt each other. But maybe it's not too late for us to find a way to be there for each other. Tears welled up in his eyes as he nodded, his voice thick with emotion. I just want to be part of your life again. Mom, I know it'll take time, but I'm ready to do whatever it takes. For the first time in years, I felt a real connection with him, something deeper than the surface-level apologies and promises we had exchanged before. This was different. It was real. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking, sharing our thoughts and feelings in a way we hadn't done in so long. It wasn't easy. There were moments of awkwardness, moments of silence, but it was progress, real progress. By the time Gavin left, the tension between us had lifted. It wasn't gone completely, but it had eased. We weren't fixed, not by a long shot, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance to rebuild what had been broken, to find a way forward together. As the days passed, Gavin and I continued to talk, slowly rebuilding our relationship one conversation at a time. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension, but there was also something else, something that had been missing for a long time, hope. I had learned a lot over the past few months. I had learned that it was okay to put myself first, that I didn't have to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. I had learned that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the past. It was about freeing myself from it. And I had learned that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to let go of the pain and give people a chance to change. But most importantly, I had learned that it was never too late to start over.